Hello, fellow book people. Today, Nonfiction November has brought me to this Fear, Trump in the White House by Bob Woodward, read by Robert Petkoff. I feel like, with a book like this, which is such a political book and such divisions, that I might as well just state my bona fides up front. I'm kind of a liberal guy from Canada, liberal, small L, liberal, from Canada, who probably doesn't agree with 99% of everything that pours out in torrents from Mr. Trump's mouth. I'm left of the Republicans. I'm left of the Democrats. Yeah, I'm about there, and I'm safe in my little liberal bubble, and I watch John Oliver and sometimes think, man, he's just pandering to me. And so sometimes I try and venture out and just sort of get different points of view, or just say, okay, let's take a little deeper dive into somebody like Trump. So that's why I picked up this book, written by Bob Woodward, who is big. This is the fellow with Woodward and Bernstein. Their reporting was arguably one of the things that took down Richard Nixon in his day. And Bob Woodward is someone who's been reporting in Washington for as Washington Post for years and years. So I felt like reasonably safe hands of I'm actually going with an actual journalist talking about Trump. And of course he's mainstream media, which it's funny. There's a thing of, like, on the left, there's very much like you should be critical of the mainstream media, but I always took that as being kind of thoughtful and like taking, like, what are they saying? What's their power structure behind them? What are the kind of the people that they might employ in the job? And to get the information, because I think someone like Woodward brings information. He just doesn't bring his own slants and distortions to the thing. I mean, I think there's unavoidable biases, and I'll bring that up later. But so that something like the very much in the right has like, you can't believe anything the media says, and even when they have videotape or recordings, well, it's all fake. It's all fake news. Has been quite the interesting and unfortunately very profitable and very effective strategy for someone like Trump, and for people in my own country who are taking of Canada. We're this little we're little junior partner, and unfortunately we sometimes take some of the worst lessons from the United States because they work. Whether we think they're great or not, people in the right in my country are also doing things. So it's always good to keep yourself abreast of what the new innovations are from coming from down north of the border. So yes, that's me. That's Bob Woodward. I'll start out with Fear. The quote at the beginning of the book is, "Real power is, I don't even want to use the word fear," which was that was presidential candidate Trump in an interview with Bob Woodward and another fellow. So yeah, that's how we open the book. So we do have a sense of, like, fear. I'm going to use fear as a way of motivating people, motivating my base. Let me just kind of go on to, like, the book. So it's like, as it says on the tin, this is Trump in the White House. It's a palace view of what's Trump, kind of from the beginning of Trump coming into right up until this year. And I mean, we're really still in the thick of it. We're not even finished his first term in office yet. Woodward used apparently extensive interviews, notes, diaries to construct a picture of kind of the chaos, the disorganization, the conflict at the Trump White House. And he's a reporter, so he's gonna focus on all the negative stuff. But there's so much stuff to focus on that you have to somehow. I sense just the media that is what is dominated our picture of the Trump White House. So it very much confirms it that way. It gives it very much gives a picture of a president who is being prevented by a lot of the people around him from kind of indulging in his worst instincts, whether it's stuff like just that trade is bad and we should just rip up all the trade agreements, or we should why are we giving money to our allies for, like, NATO or all these things, and, like, we should just rip this up. It's like, Mr. President, this is the sort of the stuff that keeps us keeps us together, and having trade with these people prevents them from falling into the hands of our opponents on the world stage, whether that's the Chinese or the Russians. It's very much just like spheres of influence. I'm not even talking about like demonizing the Russians or the Chinese. These are the competitors, and are you going to do things that are going to benefit your competitors by indulging in, wanting to protect, an old industry like steel, which seems to have, I think in the book it's one of the financial dudes, which of course I can't remember all their names, are saying like this has like a very low potential of growth. However, by you putting in all these tariffs and sanctions and stuff like that, you're going to hurt all these other industries in the United States, which actually have a very high potential for growth, high potential for employment, of benefiting the very people that you claim to be representing. However, so we get the views of people. It appears, now this is, I'll come back to this later, is these are anonymous sources. So we have a lot of people in rooms, but Woodward isn't saying who in the room was actually telling him what happened in the room. So, but it seems like we're getting viewpoints from people like Bannon, the kind of right-wing populist, the guy who basically helped Trump get into office and managed him getting into office, and people, the financial people, and people like John M. Dowd, John M. Dowd, his personal lawyer for a time in the White House. There's like, all these people that seems to be, we're getting the viewpoints from. And I mean, it's interesting. You get someone like Dowd, who's like basically like with the Mueller investigation, he's like, I don't think you're guilty, but I think you're a liar, and I think you're a hothead, and if anyone ever interviewed you would kill yourself on a whole bunch of other stuff that had nothing to do with whatever meddling with the Russians or he basically says like, you're a liar. I can't put you on this thing because you would incriminate yourself for something else entirely differently. So it's giving this crazy viewpoint of the White House, where a part of you is, at least if you take the book on face value, it's like, wow, it's amazing all the people around him that are still like the resilience of something like the American system, where there's all these people around him that are trying to kind of manage him and prevent him and steer him, and that he's someone who, if he doesn't have the piece of paper on the desk, he'll forget about it. So there's continually someone's in there grabbing the piece of paper off the desk and and keeping it away from him, and him forgetting about it. I mean, this is one of these other things, is you get this sort of staggering complexity and difficulty of being somebody in charge of the U.S. government, and why there are so many processes put in place and double checks and all that to try and help that one person on top to make all these decisions. And Trump, a part of Trump's thing is he's this businessman who's come in and just like, I make instinctive decisions. I kind of throw stuff against the wall. And it's like, Mr. President, you're in charge of such a giant thing. You can't just like try things on a whim because of just the potential of the horrible destruction and terrible consequences this might have. But this is not the guy that has been elected. This is a self-made billionaire who's got his money from his father, but who's been bankrupt a bunch of times. So there's that American kind of ethos of like, okay, let's just go in, we'll do something, and if I go bankrupt, who cares? You get a lot of these entrepreneurs who just have boom bust, and that's the great thing about the American system, I guess, in a way. But as a president of the United States of America, that is so terrifying, because as speaking of someone who, as a Canadian, we have a pretty vested interest in the Americans doing okay. I think everybody in the world has a vested interest in this gigantic large country, largest democracy in the world to actually doing okay. And the fact that it's kind of scary to have someone like this in the control. So yeah, that's my general anxiety feelings from this book. Now let's go to kind of mythology. The sources are anonymous in this book. Woodward has gotten access to a whole bunch of stuff, so he's gotten access to obviously people who are out, like someone like Bannon doubt. I think they're people who've basically detached themselves from Trump and don't have the vested interest in it anymore. And I mean, the thing is, it's like when you talk to people who are willing to talk to you, maybe you're going to talk to all the people who've got axes to grind, who are really in violent disagreement and couldn't work with him. And all the people who are actually in agreement with him are the ones that you're going to end up talking to. And that's going to slant how this book comes out. Also, the thing with Woodward is you could say he's somebody he's worked in Washington, all this time. He has a lot of strong contacts of the old guard, the old school of both Democrats and Republicans. I think he's written like a ton of books on George W. Bush, like his George W. at War books and stuff like that. And he's got even if he doesn't have a bias, the people who are going to be willing to talk to him are people of a certain kind of a globalism. Trade is good. We need to build up these trade systems, which might very well be the case. And oh my God, Trump is not exactly going to be your poster child for, his idea of fixing it is to tear everything up and and renegotiate really great, excellent deals. And it's like, I think there's probably some arguments to be made for making this liberals, talking about how can you make trade deals and stuff like that are going to actually kind of help the people of each country involved, not just like the business interests involved, even though those are of course obviously the people who are probably moving and shaping all the trade deals, even though that maybe some of the people under them whose day-to-day lives are affected would be the ones that should also have a say in the matter. And theoretically, that's the politicians who unfortunately get funded a lot by, these big businesses who have the money and all that stuff. So, that's the case there. So you got to kind of balance these things out of you can have axe grinders, you can have old guard stuff. So you might be getting, I might be getting a slanted view of Trump that way. Okay, and yes, for all the people out there who are outraged by Trump, I'm also outraged by Trump. I'm just trying to kind of weigh and balance, because sometimes I watch I read a book like this, I watch John Oliver, I read the news, and I feel like everything's designed to make me more and more aroused, more and more and I'm trying to think, no, I need to kind of calm down. If I'm afraid, that's. I'm playing into people like Trump on the right, or afraid of people, another person on the left who's got their own particular egocentric, needs and wants that wants to propel themselves into prominence. So does benefit to try and stop and weigh things. And I think the book does a decent job of allowing you to do that. He's not fear, but he's giving you points of view. Something to keep, I want to keep in mind with a book like Fear is that this is such first draft of history time. This is, we're not even through his first term yet. You have someone like Woodward who, when he was covering Bush, was very much of the viewpoint, there are weapons of mass destruction. He also, he was probably plugged into the same place people that George W. Bush was about stuff like this. And that turned out to be an erroneous thought. Now, we can look back at that now and say, they were wrong. They didn't listen to the right people. It's like, in the heat of things, in the frenzy, I can be a lot more sympathetic towards, making decisions on what you thought were the best things and then coming out disastrously wrong. Which, when you look at someone like Trump, who's really does not seem to be taking in much information to actually make his decisions, he's going by his gut and instinct like that. That's fear again. And I also think about, it's funny because we're talking about Woodward, I start thinking about my own kind of history of American presidents. And for me, I grew up in Ronald Reagan, and boy, I can tell you right now, Ronald Reagan was not a respected president back in the day. So, it's like just like changing reputations and changing ideas of what and a legacy of how all this is going to end up. I've heard someone just recently talk about that we've jumped out of a building and everything's going great because we're flying, but we haven't hit the ground yet. We haven't gone through the full 8 seconds. So yes, I don't know if a magic parachute is going to open and we're going to float softly to the ground and huzzah and great President Trump, or if we're going to just smack into that ground hard. I think some people have already smacked into that ground really hard as a result of a lot of the decisions that this president has made, and we'll see how many more do. So yeah, like, all, this is, so that's where I'm at. That's where I'm at. I've gotten this. I'm trying to. I appreciate a book like this because there's something like I was afraid, reading fear, that it was going to be a book that was just going to rile me up, and I wouldn't even be able to finish the book. But actually, no, this is like a really well written book which has a lot of interesting viewpoints in it. I have to keep in mind that it's the kind of, it is that palace view, and it's like it's men, mostly men, talking in offices and stuff like that. And meanwhile, all this is rippling out and having serious effects on the United States, on Canada, on the rest of the world. So that's the things like his equivocation on white nationalists, which I guess the most I'm not even going to go. It's just like, there's treating transgendered people in the military. There's just which it's funny. It's like, those are very personal issues, which probably cumulatively are going to affect less people than stuff like ripping up trade deals, relationships with allies, who he's choosing as allies now, who he's pumping up, his seemingly kind of semi-delusional thing that he's got this great relationship with the head of China, and that's somehow going to affect how China is going to treat the United States. And I'm in my bubble. I'm still in my bubble after reading this book. Sometimes I feel like the more I read, hopefully the thinner that bubble gets, or the wider, maybe the larger the bubble gets. I'm not going to pop the bubble. I'm always going to be in a bubble, but hopefully I can include a little bit more. And I mean, I'm sure that some people who are much more like, a Trump supporter will scoff saying like, oh, you read Bob Woodward, some establishment fake news reporter slamming Trump. This book, it actually helped. It helped make Trump a little bit more clear in my mind, and I can't say that that's decreased my fear, but it's made him more clear. A little less of the media thing, and his constant thing for tweeting, which he's like, that's my megaphone. And I mean, there's a part of me that's like, he's right. He's right about the whole tweeting, and it's his megaphone. It's like he's wielded that spectacularly. For whatever, for ill, in my opinion, but he's wielded that spectacularly. And there's a reason why this guy made it into he didn't stumble in. Whatever his instincts, whatever his freaking problem, his pathology, that has hooked in, that is fit in with our society today, which says as much bad about our society today, I would argue, than that as it does about Donald Trump. So yeah, I would if you can stand it. I know people, it's like the thought of reading an entire book on Trump, regardless of whether you're on the left or the right. There's obviously people who've read this thing because it's a New York Times bestseller, and it's an engaging book. I'm not a big nonfiction reader a lot of times, and if a book is dry, if a book doesn't have a narrative thrust to it, which, oh my God, this book has a narrative thrust to it, which is scary. Yes, and fear again. But I'm gonna take a breath, man. I was hoping to kind of knock this video down a little bit inside. Instead, I gotta go to work. That's it for now. More videos later. Apologies for such a long ramble.